Kevin Ramnarine, who many of you already know. Mr. Ramnarine is an energy consultant and was former Minister of Energy of Trinidad and Tobago. He is also currently part of the local content panel. He will talk us through the latest developments in this area and what comes next for Guyana in terms of local content. Kevin, you can start your presentation.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Dr. Irfan Ali, and other distinguished guests attending this conference today. My topic this morning deals with local content. In a few weeks from now, Guyana will mark the one-year anniversary of the start of oil production, December 2019 to December 2020. The discovery of oil in the Liza-1 well and the time it took to move from that discovery to first production is approximately 4.5 years, which is an impressive time frame by industry standards. It demonstrates the pace at which ExxonMobil is moving. The pace of development in the next 5 years will be as equally impressive. Throughout the 2020s, the Guyanese oil and gas industry will be in a constant state of growth and expansion. While there will always be some element of uncertainty, this expansion must be understood if Guyana is to properly plan its industry to meet the demands of that expansion. It is therefore important to understand what the industry would look like in 2025 or in 2030. Wood Mackenzie forecast that by 2030, Guyana's oil production will eclipse 1 million barrels of oil per day, which would require, in their opinion, 8 FPSOs. That is almost 1 FPSO per year. Woodmac also forecasts that drilling activity will peak by 2026. It should be noted that in 2020, ExxonMobil drilled 17 wells in Guyana. Therefore, that level of drilling is expected to almost double by 2026. This means that the current 4 drill ships in operation could be considered as a baseline for this decade. There is more drilling activity in Guyana today than there is in Trinidad and Tobago. And I speak of offshore drilling activity. In Guyana, there are 4 drill ships in operation as we speak, and in Trinidad and Tobago, there are 2 jackup rigs working offshore. I expect Guyana to be the center of drilling activity in the Southern Caribbean for the remainder of this decade. This increase in drilling activity also means more support vessels will be needed as these operations grow. At present, there are approximately 25 support vessels operating in offshore Guyana. The amount of support vessels varies according to drill ship activity and the number of FPSOs. The demand for berthing capacity to support these activities can therefore only increase in the next 9 years, as will demand for services such as supply of bunkers and supply of drilling fluids. I have given this brief description of what the future looks like because it is necessary to understand the demand side of the equation if Guyana is to plan the supply side. The growth story for the next 10 years, with increases in aggregate demand for all goods and services in the Guyanese economy or from the Guyanese economy, is important to understand because it will affect the supply side of the economy and its ability to respond. There is also the natural gas story. ExxonMobil has revealed that 20% of the recoverable resources discovered to date is natural gas. This would mainly be associated gas, which is different from what obtains in Trinidad and Tobago, where most of the natural gas produces non-associated natural gas. The government of Guyana has already signaled that the first use of this natural gas will be for power generation, with the aim being to greatly reduce the cost of electricity to the public. This, I believe, is a step in the right direction from both energy point of view and from both electricity point of view, and finally from the point of view of lower carbon source of electricity, because as we know, natural gas is a lot cleaner than fuel oil. Beyond the collection of revenue from the oil and gas operators, there is therefore the opportunity to build an indigenous energy services sector in Guyana. Against the background and against the context of what I see as the great ramp up of the next 5 to 10 years. Local content is a consequence, and I'll repeat that, local content is a consequence of local capacity building, which requires planning and which requires time. There are five main areas I believe focus is required. The first, of course, is the legislative framework. And when we speak of a legislative framework for Guyana, we speak to the Petroleum Commission and the local content policy. Secondly, there is skills development, which I'll talk a bit more on. And thirdly, institutional building, and specifically, of course, the Petroleum Commission, when we speak about institutional building. Fourthly, there is a physical infrastructure issue. And I'll give the example of Trinidad and Tobago. In developing energy sector, it is important to have the physical infrastructure that complements and supports that sector. In 1979, the government of Trinidad and Tobago established a company called the National Energy Corporation, whose mandate was to build physical infrastructure in support of the growing energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. And they were mandated with building the ports and with building out the industrial estates and so on. And that has worked well for Trinidad and Tobago. It may be a model that the Guyanese government may want to consider. And fifthly, there is the whole issue of ease of doing business, which I will expand on. In terms of training, there is usually an emphasis on degrees and on advanced degrees in engineering and geosciences. And that, of course, is welcome and very important. But there is also equally an important demand for technical skills, such as the advanced types of industrial welding, the TIG welding and the flux core welding. It is also evident that training is going to be required for careers in a maritime environment, as the number of vessels operating in Guyanese waters will significantly increase over the next decade. There is also the possibility that skill sets already resident in manufacturing, fisheries, and the mining sectors in Guyana can migrate to the oil and gas sector. Take note that both Edison Schwesh of Louisiana and the Wood Group of Scotland, two major companies today, started off in the fishing industry before they evolved to support offshore operations in the Gulf of Mexico and in the North Sea, respectively. So it can be done. In Trinidad and Tobago, there is a company called Sukai Diesel, which moved from the sugar industry to the oil industry when the latter closed in 2003. And today they are a major provider of services for diesel engines in the oil industry. There are some obstacles, however, to the Guyanese private sector participating more widely and more deeply in the oil and gas industry. And one such issue is ease of doing business, which is an issue which is not isolated to Guyana, but seems to be a problem in Trinidad and Tobago and a problem in the wider CARICOM. I'm happy to see, therefore, that the government of Guyana has committed to making it easier to do business in Guyana, as evidenced by the recent announcements by President Irfan Ali of an electronic single window for trade. And there are also issues around standards in the industry required, such as API standards and such as ISO standards. But I'm happy to see that some Guyanese companies are moving in the right direction to get these standards. In closing, I think the future is bright for local content in Guyana. I think thus far, I have seen some progress. You've seen Guyanese companies emerge to participate in a significant way in this sector. The example, of course, of Gisby is one of the main examples. We've seen Guyanese nationals in a very short space of time transition to working in the offshore environment on the FPSOs, on the drill ships. And I think that is a good start. And what is needed is a continuation of this trend and the creation of the ecosystem that is sort of described in what I previously said, the creation of that ecosystem that is conducive to investment and leads to the emergence of Guyanese companies um, owned by Guyanese nationals that can provide the world-class support and services that these multinational companies like the Exxon Mobils and the Repsols and the Tullows and so on, that they require. So I think there is a good foundation that has been laid in Guyana. I think the government is very aware of what has to be done, and steps are obviously being taken to put things in place to ensure that that ecosystem is created, which leads to the flourishing of a robust and world-class indigenous Guyanese energy services sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for your insight.